So where are you at with your rotational course?
So I reviewed 3 articles.
Okay.
And I wanted to bring the Krav instructors just something new for their tool belts.
Right.
New language, new cues, because a lot of times we beat that dead horse. It's like punches, 20 seconds, push-ups, punches, just go, 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 go. And it's like, get better at punching. And people are like, I can't. So I'm like, well, let's see if we can, come in at a different angle. And they were small studies. A lot of them are one was out of Thailand. One was, 2 of them were Stuart McGill. So he's Canadian, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's interesting. They used Muay Thai fighters for all of it.
Okay.
The one out of Thailand, they said boxers, but I'm assuming if you're in Thailand and you're
Thai boxing, yeah. Right.
But it's just a different way to package the information. So the one out of Thailand talked about the ground reaction force and how that ground reaction force only goes so far when it comes to striking, because you get a lot of ground reaction force, you start to walk. You don't want to walk. So you have to translate that force somewhere, and it's through the rotation of the torso.
Right.
And then I looked at, there was an article that talked about the double peak in the muscle activation. So you have the initial contraction, but then you have to allow things to relax for the joint motion. And then the secondary contraction for striking, and how that actually generates an effective mass. So it's like, okay, so if I can get my smaller people to understand how to contract, relax, contract, then they can have that effective mass at the end to create more of a striking force. And also to remind people to breathe, because they're like, right. And then in the third article, it went into a little bit more depth as to how you would train those core muscles. So they did a control group, isometric core exercises, and dynamic. And the dynamic exercises improved velocity, but the isometric improved force. So, and it's easy stuff. As I pulled it out, I thought I did. So the training protocols, it's planks, bird dog, side bridge,
Is that a McGill study? Is that a McGill study?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because like he's got, the McGill Big 3?
No.
It's like the bird dog, the side plank, and then he doesn't do the regular plank, but he does this sort of like supine head lift, which is supposed to be like, anterior core. But he does just a lot of simple stuff, but he's like really big on like how to do it and the bracing.
So, and it's everything. It's there. I guess the way I see it as it's almost dummy proof. Like you can put anyone who walks in your door through these types of exercises, and especially the isometric, they're just holding it. Then you can kind of see where people are. Be like, oh, you lift your hips, or oh, I can tell you have shoulder pain, so don't do that one. And then it gives them a break from striking.
Right.
So I put that together, and I put it into a PowerPoint, and it was like, And then I talked about it on my Krav and Coffee, which is just talking about women's self-protection, how to protect yourself without contact. Okay. Since we're in quarantine and we can't. Right. And that went okay. Like it got a little bit dicey, and then I talked about it again, and it was easier. And then I taught it and worked out some kinks. So for me, it's like there's a phrase that my husband uses that I need to be learned or something like that. I don't remember how he says it, but it's kind of like I need to mess up to figure out where, like, all right, this is my starting point. Let's see where it fails. And then I can grow from that failure.
Right.
So I'm better now than I was a month ago with it. But what's really interesting is we spoke with a guy from Israel who is one of the top level practitioners in the Feldenkrais method. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, definitely.
And today I had a woman come in who's been having trouble figuring out where her body is in space to rotate, to throw strong punches. She's strong. She's a dragon boat coach, kettlebells. She's a degree in exercise physiology, so she gets it here, but in the body it's not quite there. And I took her through some of the Feldenkrais warm-up like movement drills, and then I put her on the bag, and it was like poof, hip rotation, torso rotation, and no traps. Everything was down. She could find her range. Like, we fixed almost every issue she had. And I just had her hit the bag for like 20 seconds. And I'm like, did you see that? Did you feel that? She's like, whoa. I'm like, I know, I'm going to videotape this. Do it again. So it was perfect timing to get that this morning and then be able to come in and talk to you. So it was all this strengthening and protocols for core and contract, relax, contract, and then you just have someone move their body without fear. Right. And it's like, oh, hey. So,
well, I mean, I do think, like, from what I know about the Feldenkrais thing, I mean, I think you can categorize a lot of their stuff to it's inhibitory work. Like, you're just sort of like letting your body find its own path, which I think can fit into the category of like the contract, but then being able to relax. Because the rotational element, especially when people they're hard style, right? Like, so this is one of the problems I think that can happen with some type of kettlebell work is if the focus is too hard style, then you don't know how to, relax, and you don't know how to like let your body turn. So the Feldenkrais is just sort of all about that other element, which can then tie into the relax after the contract. And then that also allows for, like, rotation doesn't work well with a lot of muscle activation. Like, if you think about like powerlifting stuff, it's bilateral. The most load and the most force you could produce is going to be bilateral without rotation. So in order to gain rotation, there needs to be inhibition. And I think so that makes a lot of sense. It's just, I can't speak more to Feldenkrais. I just know that, like, that's, I think, a piece of what happens there. And it happens, I've done some work there, and it's almost just like they put you in positions and then your body just finds like you end up sitting up and you didn't even do any effort. And it's just kind of cool. It's like magic.
It is. It's really neat. I love it. It was such a cool morning.
Work I've done with like people that are in a state of like high tension, like when they're in like spasmodic back pain, or they're just, those people that can't rotate, like rolling works really well, which is right in that. So like FMS rolling, or just any type of like supine rocking and rolling, that becomes like this other broad category of getting people to feel that, like, just kind of going with the flow. And actually, like, you want to think of it as like you're trying to go with the momentum of your internal organs, right? So like that's sort of in a way what like momentum is like the more that we're concentric and like we're contracting or compressing like everything with our muscles, then we're actually stopping like the more internal flow. And where that the most volume will be felt will be in the abdomen, where there's like the most kind of fluid pressure from your viscera. So if you think about like just like flowing back and forth, well, it's like viscera goes back, viscera goes forward. A good like way to appreciate that is like on a trampoline. So if you like get real tight, like you won't drop as much into the trampoline. Now you might be able to like move quicker, but like if you want to be able to like flow and go longer, so you can even tie into more momentum is more endurance, maybe a little bit less power, but you need to be able to sort of rotate before you can like generate that power. So like you have to like back off and do things that would be more endurance oriented. And the more endurance oriented, the more you're actually going with the flow of your own momentum instead of trying to create that force yourself.
Absolutely.
And that's do you know who Bill Hartman is? So he's a PT out in Indianapolis, and he works, his place is iFast, and he does this intensive. So I did it, like John Herding went to a Jim Ferriss, and that's a big part of his model. It's just like the internal fluid dynamics of the body is what will, like, that promotes more movement than anything we do with our muscles, and then we can ride that, right? And a lot of, you know, what he talks about is he sort of breaks down these two archetypes of like powerlifting bodies that are wide. They're wide in the infrasternal ankle, like where, you know, everything's open, can't rotate, and then narrow, like skinnier dudes. So think about like great strikers that have long limbs and are tall because they rotate really well because they're just narrower tubes.
Yeah.
So, but a lot of that is just being able to just, you can move with your momentum a little bit better because, you know, like depending on how your shape is, it actually dictates like how stuck you might be in one direction, and you might be better in another direction. So right. I think that's a piece of what, like when I mess around with the rolling, and especially with anything Feldenkrais, it is really about like you're not using muscles, you're just going with the momentum. But I think momentum has a lot to do with like internal movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like one of the things that I liked about the instruction, the cueing through the Feldenkrais session that I did with the guy from Israel, was that he spoke about how fast movement and slow movement are all part of control. So, you know, you need to be able to do the full range of motion quickly and slowly and switching, and that's when you really know you're in control of the movement.
Totally.
And I was like, yep. This is true.
Yeah, and I think there's like a spectrum within movement that we would do as PTs, like that we progress people through. Is like typically we want to start like almost static, just so we can, like, when you're static, you can kind of tell what's going on a little bit more. However, if somebody's like has a hard time letting go, sometimes static postures are not advantageous, because like just holding your posture without a variation of posture can create more like holding. So then like the idea of flow would be like you're never really hitting a stopping point, right? So like a roll, you can say that, okay, like I'm sitting and then I'm going on my back in supine, but you can just keep flowing into the next movement. So the more that happens, then there's really no like static stopping point. There's just, you're just kind of finding different paths to go through. But that would be, less effort. And for someone who's got a hard time letting go, it makes sense that would be much more valuable, right? And you need both, but like just as a broad category, anything where that has that flow element to it would be helpful for inhibition. Now, it's people that have a hard time letting go, they have a hard time flowing too. So like figuring out how to get them to do that is not easy.
Isn't that the truth? I have a client in kettlebells. She hasn't been back, but when we were training before, she hated the segmental body roll. With a passion. I'm like, but you need it.
I think even something like anything that's a ballistic kettlebell movement has to have an element of like that letting go and relaxation. And like one of the hardest things for people to get is to actually not try to slow the bell down on the way down. And that also is like one of the most dangerous things of like any kettlebell work, is like trying to slow a moving bell down. Going with the flow of that momentum, it generates more power coming up. So like anything with like kettlebell swings or ballistic movement, especially like starting to go one hand and then the other, I think that has a lot of, letting go. But if you get too hard style, sometimes that becomes like that becomes a little detrimental. Like, so I think like lighter swings, allowing for a little bit of rotation, and just like, or just whatever you want to call it, if it's rotation or just going with wherever your body wants to go, having the bell be a little bit lighter so there's a buffer zone for, rotation maybe from where you don't want it, that it can be valuable too. Or just, do you ever do like hand-to-hand kettlebell work where it's just like juggling and
just swings? I haven't done anything because I was so just like strong first. Strong first is all you do. And then I've been seeing the pandemic has completely changed my thought process. It's really interesting, but I've been seeing these like flow drills and I'm like, man, I want to do that. And I've tried a couple and I'm like hitting myself in the leg.
Right.
As I'm trying to pass it through because I can't let my body rotate because I'm like, I will be straight.
Right.
The bell will not pull me.
but yeah, like those can be helpful, but there's definitely going to be some trial and error, and you'll hit yourself in the knee like once, and then you probably won't do it again because it's so painful. And you'll drop the bell. Like I've broken a couple floors accidentally just with that practice, so they're good to do outside. But, like I used to play basketball, and a lot of what we do with basketball is just ball handling drills, where it's like trying to flow around your head, flow between your legs, and like, you know, just being able to like make the ball part of your hand. And I think like there's a piece of that with the kettlebell that can be practiced, you know, that ends up being like you have to let go, right? And you have to become like more skilled then at rotating, but it's just whatever going in the direction that's best for the movement that you're trying to do. But like, do you find that there's certain areas that you can see with striking that people just like struggle with the most, and you know, especially like the general population that would need to be freed up?
Yeah. It's mostly what I can see is it's almost like proprioception has gone completely out the window.
Right.
Especially after quarantine, people that we trained beforehand, and then they come back and I'm like, do you know where your feet are? Like, what's going on? So with being in the fighting stance, sometimes newer people will blade their bodies more like a boxer. And in Krav, we're a little bit more straight on. And so when they overblade, then they lose the ability to rotate their pelvis, because then it starts to torque their knees, and they're like, oh, I don't want to hurt my knees. So they get really heavy. And it's everything underneath stays really straight, and then it's mostly arms. Right. And then they realize that they're too far away from the bag because they're not able to rotate. So then they lean. So that pretty rotation is gone, and now I'm really straight. Now I'm going to lean, and everything in the shoulders is here now.
And it's just a chain reaction. Yeah.
So I see that where the feet are inhibiting the pelvis rotation. And then just a lot of people don't realize how much thoracic rotation they have.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's finding range. If it's I'm not at the point yet where I can tell if it's the chicken or the egg.
Right.
But people cramp, and when we do, because we're doing so much bag work now, we don't have contact. People are really cramped when they're hitting the bags, and then this starts to happen. And I think it's because they're moving their hips. They're understanding that their power comes from their butt, we like to say. Okay. But everything is so tight in their core because they're not breathing.
Right.
That it messes up their range. So there's two different schools. It's the people who overblade and then don't really get much of the hip rotation, and then people who get where their feet need to be, but don't understand how to really let their torso rotate.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. What do you find is like, do you have anything that's like a go-to for like each archetype that is helpful?
So we usually, what we do at our school is we try to make it as functional as possible. So if somebody is overblading, then we'll stop punching and we'll go to some kicks. So we'll start with just a front kick. So that way there's, it's a natural movement that most people are used to. The analogy is your hands are full of groceries and you have to open the door, and most people can understand that. But if you are right in front of me, or the bag is right in front of me, belly button to belly button, when I step in with my left foot, my right foot is going to be on the right side of your belly button. So I'm not really going center of mass. And most people can figure that out when we say it. So we always say you want to step offline. You want to step to the side instead of stepping straight at them. And that allows the pelvis naturally to open. So then when they go to kick, they can, they have the chamber, the knee comes up, they extend the leg, and they're able to get the hip extension because the pelvis is kind of catty cornered against their target. And you can, it's feedback right away. Because if you can knock usually before COVID, someone would be holding a pad. So when you knocked your partner back, you're like, oh, dang, that was really good. And now it's like, if you can knock over your freestanding heavy bag, you're doing a good job. And then we progress from there to the roundhouse kicks. So the roundhouse, you want to hit with your shin, but your hip has to flip over.
Right.
And there's that rotation on the ball of the foot of the standing leg. So there's a lot going on with roundhouse kicks. It's one of the harder kicks for people to pick up. Mm-hmm. And same thing, we're like, all right, when you stepped offline with your front kick, now step offline with your roundhouse kick, allowing the hips to open and the leg can just whip around. And they start to feel that a little bit. And with Krav, we don't really emphasize high kicks, just for the nature of the, if it's a street fight. So people don't have to worry about hamstring mobility or anything. They can kick low and simulate the knee. And then for thoracic rotation, one of the newer things that I've been working with is when we do elbows to the back. People can throw elbows behind them with so much rotation and not even think about it.
Right.
Because your head moves. So your body's going with your head. And it's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Rotate. And I'm like, okay, so if you're throwing this elbow back, look at all that rotation you have. Can you then strike the same rotation forward? And they're like, oh. And I'm like, So I don't know. I would love to send like a survey out to the students and be like, what do you think of this craziness I'm putting you through? Because I get all excited and they're like, okay.
Yeah, I think I hear it.
That's been one of my favorites is just starting with the elbow to the back so they can feel that rotation. It even helps with the hip rotation as well.
Yeah.
And then having them throw forward.
I did like a little bit of Muay Thai like years back, but I've kept like some of the fundamentals there because it's just like in how to rotate. Because I remember like the first time they were trying to teach me like a roundhouse, and I just couldn't get it. Mm-hmm. But I feel like I've gotten somewhat better to at least where I can like understand the fundamentals. And there is so much more feedback with like a kick than a punch, I think, for rotation, especially if you're hitting something where you can create a little bit of power. Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense there to like a teep kick or like a roundhouse, like both of them give you more split of your pelvis. So it's like you get more feeling of like the difference between are you rotating or are you not? And then just anything with like elbows and knees seems to have like more feedback too of like because you're not going to create any power unless you get rotation because there's like no snap. So it has to come from like more proximally. So just like finding any type of power with like elbows and knees, I just feel like there's much more feedback for rotation. Yeah.
And it's interesting. Another thing to go back to the articles that I was reading, when I try to translate that to the students, I said to them, like, I didn't put this in my PowerPoint, and I guess I should have, but the muscles that they were looking at for contract, relax, contract, weren't your biceps and triceps, guys. And they're like, oh. I'm like, it was like lats, glutes, so it's not here. Nobody was looking at the contract and relax of your traps.
Right.
So don't worry about them. That has nothing to do with generating force.
Right.
It's all the core and hamstring. So I didn't talk about that, and I thought I should have, looking back. And then I did talk about it, and then I have feedback from people. They're like, what's a lat? And I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. All right, I don't know where to start when I teach. And it was good feedback for me. Like, okay, I need to, really help people understand what muscles you need to think about when you're teaching. Yes.
And I think like the fundamental there is like you're working from the center out, and that's actually, are you familiar with the TPI stuff at all with the golf swing?
I've seen it, but I don't know much.
So like, I mean, just from the work I've done there, like the one fundamental idea is that the sequence that all like professional golfers tend to display is
Mhm.
it's pelvis, trunk, lead arm, club. So it's just like this movement from the center out.
Mhm.
And that's a powerful rotational movement. And no matter how you see like a golfer swing, it usually comes down to they're finding that sequence at some point. But
Mhm.
like, you can have a lot of different ways of getting the club moving, and you see a lot of different swings, just like you see a lot of different like styles of striking.
Right.
But there's usually that fundamental of like, pelvis, trunk, or something from the center out, and then the lats just become like more like, that's what the way I'm starting to think about it is like lats and even serratus, like, because it depends on like what action you're doing, right? If you're reaching, it might be more serratus. If you're packing, it might be more lat. But it's just shit under here, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's closer to your center. It's under your pit because the traps are up here, right? The
Right.
upper trap, and it becomes sort of just more, all right. Like, we don't want to be here or here. We want to be more under here,
Yeah.
but that would be even like secondary to being more in the center whenever we can.
Mhm.
But what I see happening, and not so much like, 'cause I'm not doing specific striking, but like with any type of like kettlebell movement where I'm trying to get a little bit more rotation or some higher velocity rotation stuff, is people will get good at understanding their center at like a high tension,
Yeah.
but then they, like, I think what you were talking about is they can't let go of that tension, then they can't find a distance. So like it becomes like everything is short. And like, do you ever have somebody do a kettlebell swing and they're finally figuring out how to like get the hips involved and pack the lats, but then it's like this
T-Rex
because
arms.
they can't let, yeah, because they can't let go. But I think that is almost part of a progression
Mhm.
sometimes, or like an appropriate regression to get you into the center. But
Yeah.
then like then you have to be able to like release and like let some of the distal extremities come out, and that could be tricky, certainly. But
Mhm. Yeah. I have a question for you.
yeah.
Going back into the center, some of the or FMS stuff that I was looking through when I was looking for rotational power, they were talking about the connection between the internal, external oblique and the hip adductors. And the one gentleman, I think his first name was Eric. I can't remember his full name now, but he went through this progression of stabilizing through the core and using the hip adductor with the contralateral internal external oblique. And I've been using that, and it's amazing
Mm-hmm.
how A, difficult it is, and B, that most of the fighters, everyone, well, within my demographic, uh, the left side is markedly harder than the right side.
Yes.
And it's
So
like, oh.
like my more thorough understanding of this is through PRI,
Okay.
because their whole like methodology starts with that we're naturally asymmetrical, and
Mm-hmm.
the internal organs and the internal flow basically kick us to the right. And then the way this was even like expanded upon further by Bill Hartman is, if you think about like the flow of the movement of our insides, it's
Mm-hmm.
like a current going left. So if something is coming at us, like there's a current coming at us going left, we're going to turn into it and to try to not get knocked over. And when we
Yeah.
turn into it, we'll turn towards our right to sort of create like a plant, right? Because this is
Mm-hmm.
coming this way to the left, and that creates us to more internally rotate and weight bear heavier on the right side. So with that being like the basis of that kind of natural asymmetry that you'll see from a lot of people, then that means that the left side has to be like a little bit more open and external rotation, but you're also not going to be as likely to have your body over that side. So it won't be as apt to take weight bearing. So you won't, the way that might manifest like in gait, where it's just like you don't pivot, you don't rotate over that side more. So like your heel strike will be more to the lateral edge of your right foot and more medial on the left side. And then like with something like powerful rotation, like your
Mm-hmm.
pivot might be harder on your left, because like you just can't like get full rotation. We can think of it as like you can't get full internal rotation, but a lot of times it just manifests as like you just don't feel like you're in that leg as much.
Yeah.
So the adductor connection that I think you can feel pretty well practically with the contralateral internal oblique, and then the ipsilateral internal oblique, and then the contralateral external oblique, because you're trying to rotate yourself towards that side. So ipsilateral rotation is the internal obliques.
Okay.
And what you're doing with the adductor is it's sort of like a brake, right? So if I just keep going to this side and my hip kicks out and I don't have my adductor activity, it's like a sway. And I don't have power, I don't have rotation, I just have more of like a frontal plane motion.
Right.
So think of it like the windmill in, like if you think about the windmill with a kettlebell, is you want to feel like that femur is going into the socket and your hip is going back. So that into the socket moment, if you get that right, you should feel like it's adductor activity that's sucking that hip into the socket. All right. Now with a windmill, you're like going into more flexion. So it won't be the same as like when you're upright or like during gait, but it still is like you're loading that side, and you don't want to load the front side basically. So it becomes like the similar thing. But I think as you start to flex, it'll be like opposite obliques. But think about just in a stance leg, if you suck up into the socket and you feel, let's say your left adductor, and then you feel your left lateral abs on that side, with an inward pull, so let's say internal oblique, that should subtly pull the belly button to the left, and that should sort of line you up more over that left side. And I think of the adductor as like, it tells me that I'm staying stable on that leg, like I'm not continuing to go. Because I can turn, I can feel my obliques, but if I don't have like an anchor in my foot, and I think that adductor becomes an anchor. And especially as you're going faster, like that could be a really good cue to say, like, as you're turning and you're trying to pull. So say I'm just going to like do a terrible example of a punch, but if I was going to throw like a right punch and I wanted to turn this way, I'd want to feel like I'm sort of pulling back into my left. So and then the adductor would be a good cue to say that I got rotation there, and didn't like kind of compensate in a way that was inefficient. So I think that's, like, I don't remember that being talked so much about in the FMS, but I'm sure it's been expanded upon. But PRI goes into that a lot, and then the Bill Hartman model goes into that a lot. And I think that, it's a huge area to be able to feel. And that's practically is just the way I think of it, is like, again, it's an indication that you haven't gone too far into rotation and like cheated. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't thought about it that way, but that makes a lot of sense. That's awesome. Thank you.
And then, like, there's some real easy like references that they use in PRI. Like, if you're going to take a class, like the best one to take is, I think, instability and impingement, because it just basically breaks down the gait cycle, and then it gives you these different references to look at to tell you, like, are you more on the right side, or are you more on the left side? But like the gait cycle is all about subtle rotation, or not so subtle rotation, slower, like less powerful rotation. You can think of it that way. So like if you want to get on a leg and you're in standing, you think outer edge of your left heel, that's one anchor, right? You think like adductor in the socket, but like high adductor. So you can almost think of it as like you're almost creating like a pinch in the groin. And then it becomes internal obliques on that side, and that turns you to that side. And depending on what position you're in, you might actually feel like a little bit of like your glute med in that area too, because it's more internal rotation as well. But the adductor tends to be way more active, like as a reference point. And then the opposite would be like, all right, so if I'm going to the right, think of that as like a pulling, or sorry, to the left. It's like a pulling motion. I'm pulling into the socket, but I've anchored my heel. So I'm like pulling back. So you'll get some hamstring there, because that's like when you pull back into your heel, you get some hamstring. So it's hamstring and adductors together with the internal obliques. On the opposite side, you think of that as a pusher. So it's assisting your rotation, and it becomes your glute max, like as an external rotator, because that as that pushes, and I want to be more on the inside part of my foot, like towards like my inner arch, because it's like basically it crosses the body there. So if I go into like eversion and I move to the inside part of the foot, it creates more activity on the lateral glute max, but you don't want to be feeling that push and weight bearing. So that's the tricky part. Like, so from a bilateral standpoint, like you could think about it as coming up from a deadlift or coming up from a squat. Like as you're going down, you'll bias a little bit more supination, opening, right? Like into, at least initially, into external rotation, and then the mechanics change as you get deeper. But typically as you come back up and you're trying to finish a squat or a swing, you should move relatively more to the medial aspect of the foot. That doesn't mean you want to completely collapse, but you don't want to like not have your big toe on the ground when you finish your swing, right? So that creates more propulsion on the way up bilaterally. But if I'm on one side and I'm like pushing towards this side, then I'm going to be propelling off my right leg to push me to my left, which means like I'm not weight bearing as much on this. And that it basically is throwing me to that left side. So that's how the hip mechanics work together. And then that would be external obliques on the right side, because it's sort of an opposite relationship to the internal obliques, right? Because external is contralateral rotation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That is, I need to digest that, but we might talk about that again.
We should, yeah. I mean, but that, like, I think it's actually, from all of that I've done with PRI, it's helpful to have the big view there. And I think that's what that course was, and all those references, like having the, just the broad view of everything, and then going into the specific anatomy, because they start you with a lot of the specific joint and anatomy, and it's like their whole language is different, and it's a little overwhelming at first, where I felt like actually getting the references of saying, okay, like the glute is a pusher and it pushes me to the left, and like actually just feeling it in your body, then it's actually easier to understand the pelvic mechanics and all of this different stuff that come from it. So, and practically it's just like, you're not going to teach your clients all of the subtleties of like pelvic mechanics, but you can tell, like, I want you to reach this knee and feel your ass, right? Or I want you to, can you feel like your outer heel and feel your inner thigh at the same time? Like those references become really powerful, practically for anybody. And that, then it can be like, the more references you can get someone to feel, the better. But sometimes it's like just one is all you can ask someone to get, you know what I mean? And it's like over time, you get them feeling more stuff, but you just have to see where they're at any moment. Cool.
I like that. I took a PRI course maybe 2 years ago now. And it was...
Which one?
It's very general. Maybe like PRI for strength trainers or something.
Okay. Yeah, I know what you're talking. I'm actually taking online like this year, because I wanted to take that, and I think that's another example. I haven't taken that yet, but it gives you like the broader view.
Yeah.
And then like I instability and impingement is more geared towards therapists.
Yeah.
But still like a broad view and geared towards the gait cycle, which I really like when somebody like breaks a specific movement down with those references as a, you know what I mean? Like, I just think it's an easier way. Then you can extrapolate that movement, like gait, and then tie it into like kicking and punching and the golf swing. So
right. Generalizable. I like that.
Yeah.
That's good. Nice. I will look into that one.
And then myokin would be the other one. That's the first one I did. That talks a lot about the muscles and the hip action. And the other term that's really important to understand is the hip shift and the way that they describe that, which is basically what we just talked about, like those references. But myokin is mostly just working on like how to get the hips to shift, and then the theory behind it, and then like specific muscles though, which I think like the more specific you get, the easier it is for like a theory to be refuted, and it's not always necessary, but it is helpful to like be able to go real specific and then go broad. And I think the myokin stuff is like real specific, and then the I stuff is really broad, and they work well together.
I have a tendency to go down rabbit holes sometimes. I'll get too specific, and I lose sight of the big picture.
Right.
So, and often, not just with physical stuff, I've had a couple other passions pop up, and I'll call my friends, and I'm like, am I going down a rabbit hole? Am I missing the big picture here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of learning. I always do the same thing, and especially after you just get done taking a course or something, it's whatever that course is about. I think it's a good thing to kind of go down that rabbit hole for a little bit, because it'll help you understand it better than you could in like 2 days. But then inevitably you'll realize, like, okay, there's other stuff too that you know already, and that not everybody, like, depending on your clientele, most people do best with just general stuff. And then it's just about, like, I think it's more about gathering information so you understand what you're seeing, but you don't always have to change it right away, because some people are just like in the process of practicing, but your clients, and like, sometimes it's just more frustrating to like try to be specific, but like, you can go there because you have the information when the time comes. And that's how, like, I feel with my clients, where I know them very well and I've known them for a while, and I know they still need stuff, but like, it's not the time to go really into like PRI. But is there a way to take like the principles, like the references, and then put it into something that is like working out, or it's what they paid for, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then like, there's certain days where I get people that are just, they're concerned about something and they want to slow it down. They kind of want to learn a concept more, and then boom, it's like, go as deep as you want, because you know how to. But you gotta read that situation. It's always tricky.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, this was great. You have questions for me? Like, I think that's cool what you're doing there. And I like what you looked at with those studies, like it gives you like broad categorization. And I think that's huge. Like, to just take the categories that you got from the study and then just try to build different movements, things that like speak to your clientele too, which is always tricky. But like, I don't think you need more studies than that. You know what I mean? Because like, you've gotten several things to work on. Now you have to be able to see how your clients implement them. And then that becomes an ongoing process.
Right. Yeah. It was fun. It was fun to go in and try to find some research. And at first I was, I get very proud, maybe, I don't know. And my husband's like, look at this, look at this website. And I'm like, I don't want websites. I want scholarly articles. Right. But it was a website he gave me where I found the link to the first, the double peak in muscle activation. And I was like, and from there I was able to see what was referenced, and then I built from there. And I'm like, damn it, I hate when he's right. But it was cool. And it was it's nice because with the Feldenkrais method, Feldenkrais was actually like one of the godfathers of Krav, and like Krav is contact combat.
Did not know that. Yeah.
It's not the marketed history. It's not as well known as, Emi. They say Emi was the founder of civilian Krav Maga.
Okay.
But in Hebrew, Krav Maga is contact combat. So when you say I train in Krav Maga, you train in contact combat, which could be anything.
Right.
What makes Krav so cool is that it's instinctual and reflexive movement. Right. So with all of the awareness of movement that Moshe Feldenkrais was interested in, he took that knowledge. He was actually a black belt in judo, so like he understood the movement of the body. He was a martial artist, and then he came at the Israelis with a knife and was just like, wow, what would you do to that? And they're like, yeah. He's like, okay, well, that's your reflex. Let's see if we can build on it and make it more effective. And that's when this came about. That's a 360, and you'll see that in almost every traditional Krav Maga school now. But the reason it works is because it's what your body, it's the movement your body wants to do. Right. So we might as well build on it. So I was able to make that connection with the Kravists to kind of hook them. And then I started, geeking out on all of the other things. But I love the windmill. I want to look into that. That's one of my big star over here. Because I feel if we can get them understanding that pelvis movement, then the head movement will come with it. A lot of people fight really stiff, but if you watch Mike Tyson, he'll just slip ever so slightly. It'll just go woo, right past his eye, and then he's loaded to come up with that massive uppercut.
Right.
And now, because we can't have so much contact, we have the time to dive into it. So this is cool. I appreciate it, Chris. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.